city engineer. With me is Nick Amatuccio from Bolton and Mank, as well as some other staff members from Bolton and Mank. Tonight's public open house here is really going to focus on the assessments and construction. Design-wise, nothing has changed from the previous meeting. We're going to do a presentation quick. We'll take the questions online, and then we'll open it up for questions here so we can stop the online recording. And kind of depending on what your question is, we're going to direct you to a different person who kind of specializes in different topics. So I'm going to turn it over to Nick for the presentation.
All right. Thank you, Eric. Okay. So yeah, tonight we'll just go through a relatively brief presentation focusing on special assessments and the construction process, as that's going to be starting soon. So just a recap of the project area. I think most of you know this, but pretty much the majority of the Central Avenues neighborhood, basically all the streets that haven't been touched yet. So 9th Avenue, 10th Avenue, 11th Avenue, 12th Avenue, and 13th Avenue, all getting fully reconstructed, along with a couple blocks of 3rd Street North and 4th Street North. And then we are also going to be doing some street resurfacing, so just more pavement maintenance on 2nd Street North between 8th and 12th, and 3rd Street North between 11th and 15th. So we got bids from contractors about a month and a half ago now. We received 7 bids, and then RL Larson Excavating was the low bidder. Their low bid amount was about $11.5 million, which is about $2.7 million under our estimate, which is good news. So total project costs are now down to $14.9 million. So project budget and assessments. The project is going to be funded by basically 5 categories. About a third of the project, or a little more, will be from general taxes and bonds. The other about half the project will be utility funds from the city, so storm sewer fund, sanitary sewer fund, and water main fund. And then about 13% of the project will be funded by individual special assessments to property owners. So 280 properties are being assessed. 278 of them are single family homes, and about a third of those have lower than typical assessments due to previous assessments they received on adjacent streets back in 2011, 2012 for those projects. And then there's 2 non-single family, or I'll refer to them throughout the presentation as commercial properties, and they receive benefit appraisals as well, since those amounts can get quite high compared to the single family homes. So we want to make sure they're not getting out of hand. So total special assessment amount is $1.9 million for all properties, and all special assessments for every property went down from what was estimated or reported during the preliminary engineering, and those are preliminary assessment amounts that you received due to favorable bid pricing.
All right, good
job. So special assessment policies from the city. Assessments are proposed for all reconstructed streets, so those north-south avenues, 4th Street North and 3rd Street North from 9th to 11th. There's no assessments for the pavement resurfacing and maintenance along 2nd Street and 3rd Street. The street assessment is compiled of 70% of the total street improvement costs, which varies for each property based on the front footage. Streets with no adjacent property address, so 3rd Street and 4th Street, for example, will be distributed 1 block north and south, although you don't get that if you're already getting a cap amount on the frontage. And then residential properties are also subject to an assessment cap, which I'll get into on the next slide. Utility mains, so water main, sanitary sewer main, and storm sewer main in the street. There's no assessments to properties for that. There is assessments for the water and sewer service utilities, the individual services that go to each property. They're assessed at 50% of the as-bid actual service costs for residential properties and 100% of the costs for commercial properties. Utility assessments for residential properties were lowered by approximately $940 for each property due to the favorable bid prices. This is basically the main reason why all the assessments went down. There's no assessment for your property if your full service was replaced in the last 10 years. So your total assessment amount is your utility assessment plus the street assessment. Those special assessment caps I mentioned, the front foot rate cap for residential properties only, it doesn't apply to commercial properties, is $109.32 per front foot. This is the cap rate for this year. Every year it increases 3%. The front footage cap for residential properties is 125 feet. So if you happen to have a property more than 125 feet, we would only count up to that amount. As I mentioned, caps do not apply to commercial properties. Benefit appraisals for these properties are used and then compared to the assessment policy, and then the lower amount is used. So these caps are primarily used because if we didn't have them, that front foot cost would be more like $200 a foot for 70% of the actual construction costs. So these were put into place many years ago, to kind of keep those assessment rates down. Preliminary assessment amounts were mailed to each property receiving assessment. These are essentially final. Next week at the council meeting on April 15th, they will be voting to adopt the assessment roll and make it final. Assessments range from down to $3,000. This is for the one side street assessment we have with no utility work, up to $30,000 for one of the commercial properties that we have. Assessments for a typical 50-foot lot, however, on the avenues is just over $7,000 total, with about $5,500 being the street assessment, $850 for water, and $860 for sewer. And then, as I mentioned before, the 2011, 2012 projects assessments were considered when calculating these proposed assessments. So people who got assessed for those projects from side streets about 15 years ago, they will be getting lower assessments. So here's a map showing all the properties to receive a special assessment. So you can see all the properties highlighted in yellow is your kind of typical avenues frontage assessment. There's one property highlighted in blue up in that triangle property for at Nantucket Mills and 4th. That's a side street unit assessment. The ones that are crosshatched in the red, overlaid on the yellow, those were assessed previously in 2011 or 2012, so those have lower assessment amounts. And then properties that are crosshatched in purple are those commercial properties where we got special benefit appraisals for. And then there's some properties that are crosshatched in blue along the regional trail that are kind of irregular shaped because of the regional trail right away. So an area adjustment was applied to those parcels, and I'll explain that a little more in the upcoming slides. So here's an example for your typical 50-foot lot in the neighborhood. 138 9th Avenue, for example, it's a street assessment per the cap. So you take that cap amount of $109.32, multiply by the 50 feet of frontage, and that gets your street assessment. So that's just over $5,400. They are getting their water service replaced and their sewer service replaced. So you add in those two amounts as well. You come up with a total of $7,188.58. That is the most common assessment throughout the neighborhood. Example 2, 101 11th Avenue North. Pretty much everything the same as the previous example. 50-foot lot. So use the cap amount of $109.32. However, they already had their water service replaced in the last 10 years, all the way to the main and the street. So they were able to provide documentation on that. We took that off their assessment amount, and we can still do that, by the way, if you have service, water service or sewer service that was replaced in the last 10 years, just reach out to us. So we don't add it for this property. We didn't add in the water service, just the sewer service. So that brought down their assessment down to $6,334. This third example is a little more complicated because this is one of the properties that had a previous assessment in 2011, 2012. So for example, this one at 324 10th Avenue North, we would start off by taking that same cap rate, $109.32. This property happens to have 80 feet of frontage. So we multiply it by 80 feet, you get a street assessment of $8,745.60. But they had a unit assessment paid for the work on 4th Street North in 2012, an amount of $2,000, $2,728.85. In 2012, the assessment cap rate was $74.45 per foot. Multiply that by the 80-foot frontage. They would have paid $5,956 back then. So the percentage of the cap that they did pay in 2012 for that side street assessment was 46%. So the remaining percentage owed on the cap for this year is 54%. So the street assessment is that what the full assessment would have been if they didn't have an assessment previously, that $8,745.60 multiplied by 54%. So it brings it down to $4,738.64. They're also getting water service replacement and a sewer service replacement. So add those in, their total assessment, $6,461.22. I can go, if you have a property like this, or you think you have a property like this, I can kind of explain each one individually if you have questions later on. Fourth one, final example is one of those properties along the regional trail right away. You can see it's not a rectangular shape like the rest of the properties. There's about 10 of these in the project. So we still take the street assessment per cap, but we do an area adjustment. So we still use $109.32. It has 105 feet of frontage along 12th Avenue North. This is 137 12th Avenue North. But then we do that area adjustment. So we take the area of the parcel, which is just over 8,200 square feet, divided by the depth of the parcel at 123 feet. And we come up with 67 feet, what would be the frontage if it was a rectangular lot. So multiply that frontage, 67 foot, by the cap rate of $109, you get a street assessment of $7,324. Add in the water and sewer service assessments, you get a total amount of $9,047.02. So there are 4 payment options for assessments. First is you can prepay in full or part without any interest until July 31st of this year. That would be paid directly to the city. Second option is still paying directly to the city, again, in full or part until November 15th of this year. But that period between July 31st and November 15th, interest would accrue. However, that's pretty short duration, so it's not going to be much. And then the third option, probably the most popular option because you don't need to do anything, it automatically gets rolled over onto your county taxes. So that remaining balance for anything not paid before November 15th or by November 15th would be put on your taxes and then be paid annually over a 15-year period with an interest rate of about 6% historically. That interest rate is tentative. We won't find that out until the city sells their bonds in the next several weeks here, and we'll let everyone know what that final interest rate is once we know. The fourth option, least popular option because it just kind of pushes off the assessment and you have to qualify for it too. It's deferring the assessments or paying at a later date. To qualify, you need to apply with the city each year you want to defer your assessment. And you have to be a homestead property and have an income limit of approximately $50,000. Again, that amounts an estimate based on last year's amount. It increases every year. We'll get the exact amount to residents when it's known. And then also you have to be one of the following, either be 65 years or older, active military, or on full-time disability. So again, we'll take questions at the end. And the interest rate and that income limit is tentative assumed, and we'll confirm that and mail it out to residents in the next month or so. So here's an example payment schedule. If you were to let it roll onto your taxes and pay it over a 15-year period so for example, this is the most common assessment amount for a 50-foot lot at $7,188.58 for their total special assessment. And then assuming a 6% interest rate, you can see how the payment schedule will work out. The annual principal is the same each year. So it's not like a mortgage where that goes down. It's the same each year, and then the annual interest reduces each year. Nothing is paid in 2025. So that first payment at the end of 2026 is actually for 17 months instead of 12. That's why that one's quite a bit larger. And then they continue to decrease. So, and you could pay this off before the 15-year period. However, once it goes to the county, you can only pay it once a year. And if you pay it early, you do have to pay the interest through that year. So say you want to pay it in 2026, you do have to pay that interest of $611.03 plus the remaining balance. So upcoming project schedule, obviously we're getting closer to construction here tonight. We're having our final neighborhood meeting, reviewing final assessments, and we'll go over the construction process and schedule. Next week on April 15th, Tuesday night, 6:30 p.m. right here in the council chambers will be a city council meeting to conduct the public hearing on assessments and consider adopting the assessment roll. We'll also be asking the council to award the contract to the low bidder, RL Larson Excavating. And then late April, early May, we'll be looking to start construction. Construction will substantially be completed on phase 1 streets in October or November of this year. And then we'll start back up construction next spring, either April or May, depending on weather. And then that'll start the phase 2. And then that'll finish up next October, November in 2026. Then final punch list and cleanup items might trickle into spring of 2027. So this is a little more detail in the construction phasing. Essentially, we are going to be starting on 9th Avenue and moving to the west and north. So all the streets outlined in red are going to be constructed in 2025. All the streets outlined in blue are going to be constructed in 2026. And then there's a few blocks in the middle that aren't outlined on 11th Avenue and one block of 4th Street. Those are what we're calling flex phases. They'll either be constructed later this year or early next year. And I actually just talked to the contractor today. They intend to get all that done this year. So as of right now, the plan is to basically get 9th, 10th, and 11th all done this year, and then 12th and 13th would be next year. Contractors also looking to start as early as April 28th, so coming up pretty soon here. We will, once we finalize that schedule and dates with the contractor, we have a meeting with them next week. We'll be sending out a newsletter to all the residents with the most updated schedule and anticipated future schedule. So the construction process is kind of going to be broken down into 4 weeks of pavement removals and utility construction for each subphase. So the contractor is not going to go into every block at once. I'll go back to this map. Contractor's going to start in segments. They might do 2 at once. They're indicating that they might want to start on 9th and 10th Avenue at the same time to start off the project with multiple crews, just to get through it quicker. But they're not going to open up the entire neighborhood at once. So for each segment, it's going to be 4 weeks of pavement removals and utility construction. So they'll remove the pavement, then get into the sanitary sewer replacement, water main replacement, sewer and water service replacement to each property, and then the storm sewer installation. Those service line replacements look something like this, where each resident has a water and sewer service that comes from the main of the street to their house. The right-of-way, the public right-of-way goes from all the way to the back of the sidewalk or a couple feet behind the sidewalk. So that's what we're going to be replacing the services up to. However, you do own, or each resident does own the entire service from the main to the house. So that's why that assessment comes in to pay for that. The remaining portion behind the right-of-way up to the house, that could be a potential private service replacement if a resident is interested, or if there's a material that is being used that's out of code, such as lead water pipe or Orangeburg sewer service, which is like a tar paper sewer service. If we find one of these materials while we're excavating and connecting to your service, we will let you know and explain next steps. So after the utility work is done, there's 3 weeks of street reconstruction approximately. So starting with the roadway reconstruction of excavation and grading, kind of building the base material back up, and then installation of concrete curb and gutter. then pouring concrete driveways, and then paving the first layer of the asphalt roadway. Then there's approximately 3 weeks of boulevard restoration, including pouring the concrete sidewalks, paving asphalt driveways, irrigation and visible dog fence repairs, since we will be getting into those most likely with the utility work, and then restoration behind the curb, including topsoil and turf. New sod will be installed at all residential properties. And then at the end of each year, at the end of all the phase 1 streets in 2025 and the end of all the phase 2 streets in 2026, there will be about 2 to 4 weeks of final cleanup and final paving. So some miscellaneous work in these weeks would be like signage, tree planting, manhole castings, cleanup work. And then the final layer of asphalt roadway is then paved, kind of one of the final steps. And then roadway pavement markings, crosswalk markings would happen at the end. So I mentioned tree planting in the boulevards. That is for any trees that are getting removed as part of the project. Unfortunately, we do have to remove a handful of trees on each block for a few reasons. They're either an ash tree, they're in poor condition, dying, they're in conflict with utilities. This is a pretty common one, unfortunately, where the sewer and water line go directly under the tree, or conflict with road construction or grading. And that primarily means some of the much larger trees that have just outgrown the smaller boulevard space and pushed up the curb or the sidewalk and can't be protected. So trees that are removed will be replaced with a new 2-inch diameter tree later that fall or the following spring. And people who are getting a tree removal should have received a letter in the mail already explaining the tree removal and requesting a tree species for what you want to be put back in the boulevard. I think we have 10 different options for tree species that we're planting. So some additional construction impacts and access, private utilities. I'm sure a lot of you have seen Centerpoint and Michaels out there already replacing the gas main throughout the neighborhood. They're going to be doing that on the majority of the blocks through the neighborhood. Some have already been replaced. But so that's going on. That will continue into the first month or two into construction. They might wait to do 12th and 13th Avenue until later this year or early spring next year. They're going to focus on 9th, 10th, and 11th to start. And then there's going to be some other minor relocations. You might see some utility poles get moved by Xcel Energy, some communication lines like Comcast, CenturyLink get moved or protected. You might see that work ahead of our street and utility work. There might be some unplanned outages during construction. Obviously, we try to avoid that, but sometimes things don't get marked correctly. So we'll obviously work with the private utilities when we know about it, but we don't always know about it, especially if it's a smaller service line that they don't even see when they're digging. So if you run into something, a disruption in your phone line, internet, you reach out to us, and you can also reach out directly to the utility company too. Temporary water shutdowns will be required when we're connecting into existing mains and setting up the temporary water system. But we are going to be supplying a temporary water system to all properties receiving new water services so that you continue to have water during the 4 weeks that we're replacing the main in the street. We'll be reaching out with notices about that and what that involves. But essentially, you'll be able to use water just the same. It'll just be coming in through your outside spigot from a temporary hose outside connected to a fire hydrant. So benefit is you get free water during this time. But yeah, it's just a different way of feeding your house with water. Otherwise, it's mostly the same. And then we'll switch you back over when the water main work is done. No planned disruption to sewer service. And I forgot to mention those temporary water shutdowns, when they do happen, we'll also notify you at least 24 hours in advance. And those are usually like 4 to 6 hours during the middle of the day. We try to keep them as short as possible. There will be temporary access restrictions during the utility excavations. Some of these excavations, well, a lot of them are 8 to 10 feet deep. So if that's in front of your driveway or an alley, you won't be able to access when they're doing that. They are required to backfill that excavation at the end of each day. So you'll be able to get in at the end of each day on the weekend. The exception to that with utility work is on the block of 11th Avenue North between First Street North and Second Street North. The sanitary sewer is actually 20 feet deep, so we won't be able to backfill that each night. So there'll be a time where that block won't be accessible for about a week, 2 weeks maybe. And we'll notify those residents on that block for that kind of special circumstance. Luckily, there's only a few driveways off that block. The other main access restriction will be when we pour the concrete curb and driveways. That needs to cure for 7 days. So again, we'll be handing out notices to everyone when that happens, let you know in advance that you'll need to get your car out before that if you want to use it for those next 7 days. Landscaping and retaining walls. A lot of you probably received notices in addition to the tree notices if you might have some impacts to landscaping or retaining walls or railings within the right of way. So you can reach out to the project team if you have questions about that. Generally, retaining walls will be replaced or salvaged and reinstalled if we can't protect them. Sometimes we can protect them and not even get into them. And then landscaping, we try to avoid, but if we can't, we let you know because landscaping, like planting beds, flowers, that is on the responsibility of the homeowner to move if they want to save it. Otherwise, we're just going to rip it up. So notify the product team about things like that. And if you have any special needs or events, if you have a grad party some weekend, let us know. We might not be able to, we're not going to be able to stop the construction, but we might be able to accommodate in other ways. Special deliveries or special needs, you got to get to a doctor appointment, whatever, we can try to work around that and talk to the contractor and make sure you get some temporary access if needed. So more on project communication, we do have a website. If you haven't been there already, hopkinsavenuesproject.com. You can sign up to receive updates. We'll send these out weekly during construction. You can sign up via email or text or both. We also got on the website presentations like tonight. You can watch the video in a couple days. That'll get uploaded. We have documents such as these boards in the room here, layouts, and then frequently asked questions and the construction updates throughout the summer. So again, the website will be updated weekly with those text and email updates. Newsletters will also be sent out monthly. We'll send one out soon in the next couple of weeks here when we know the confirmed schedule from the contractor. And those will get sent out on a monthly basis. And then notices will get hand delivered as needed for property specific items, water shutdowns, access restrictions, things like that. Our construction manager is sitting in the back, be available for questions after the meeting here. Josh Robbie, his phone number and contact information is here and also on the website. And then John Brennan is our construction inspector who will be there daily, basically be there when the contractor is. And he's also a primary contact to reach out to during construction.